And he joins us now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. A lot of interesting stuff up there. Doug Pederson, you just got done listening to Sidney Jones, and I'm interested to get your take on Jones. But interesting because he was asked about a report that was out there, John, that suggested, hey, he's going to be on the field in October, all patched up, ready to go. Doug Pederson said the medical staff is happy with where he's at, but at the same time, we're not going to put any timetable. They're going to do right by him. Then, Jones was asked about it. So any thing from Sidney Jones talking about when he feels like he might be back, and is that October timetable something that is potentially happening?
Well, it is if you listen to his original surgeon, who obviously would know better than anybody else. But the Eagles, from the day they drafted him, Howie Roseman made it pretty clear they were going to err on the side of caution. And nothing has changed from that. Doug Pederson sort of gave the party line. Sidney Jones backed it up when he spoke to us. And right now there's no timetable. He's not, earmarked for October. But the hope is he's going to play this season. He'll get the boot off, his walking boot off, later this month, May 21st. So he's headed in the right direction. And his own surgeon, as I said, who's the go-to guy. He's not some, little surgeon in a hole in the box. He's the go-to guy in the entire country for that type of operation. He put the worse end, the more pessimistic end, at 6 months. And the guy had surgery on March 22nd. So do the math, and he should be ready to go by sometime in October, but nobody's willing to say that.
Hey, do you think the Eagles – I know Howie Roseman said the other day that they would treat this, similar like the Sixers. They've been doing this, but football's different. If you're like, let's say you're in mid-October or late October, and you're, say, 5-5, does the team say, look, he's healthy and he can help us, or is it different? I mean, do they view it in a different way? How do they handle when he's available or when he's cleared as opposed to when they put him back on the field?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're 5-5 in the NFL, that kind of means you're still in the playoffs.
Exactly.
Most likely.
Exactly.
So, you're going to be fighting to improve and to be in a wild card position. So, in theory, if he's ready to play, I've often said you can talk about a Sixers-type mentality for the Eagles, but it just doesn't work. It not only doesn't work for them, it doesn't work in the NFL in general, and it's certainly not going to work in this city. And as strange as it is to say that, because fans of the Sixers have been very patient for the most part, I don't think the fan base of the Eagles would be patient.
John McMullen with us here on the Sports Pass. So, John, while you were chasing down Sidney Jones, Mike and I were kind of going on about Achilles tendons and how those tears operate in the NFL and players that have come back. And there was a rash of Achilles tendon ruptures in 2014 where a bunch of big names went down, like Demaryius Thomas and Terrell Suggs and Vince Wilfork and Robert Mathis and guys like that. At the same time, Sidney Jones is in a different camp and a different situation, maybe, but with his age. I guess my question to you about Achilles tendons and his age is, do you remember a time when a team has drafted somebody? These were existing NFL players that came back from an Achilles tendon tear. Do you remember another situation where a guy was drafted with an Achilles injury and then they waited it out?
I can't think of someone off the top of my head. I'm sure it's happened because that's the type of injury that always happens. And you're right about being younger. Certainly is more desirous for teams. They think that there's no question the Eagles, his doctor, Sidney himself, they all think he'll be back to his normal self at some point. The only question is when. So it's always a concern, but this is a guy the Eagles claim they had top 10 on their board. If he wasn't injured, and he probably would have been their pick at number 14 overall if he and Derek Barnett were both on the board. So they took the chance, and I think it's a good roll of the dice, so to speak, because the kid does have enormous talent, and he has the ability to be a lockdown corner. But injuries are tough because they really are personal. When Jason Peters tore his Achilles twice, I mean, because of his size, there were questions whether he would ever be the same, and he did. He came back, and he's fine, and he's 35 years old, playing at the Pro Bowl level. There's no reason to think a young kid like Sidney Jones can't get back to where he was before this injury.
I know you guys heard a lot about toe curls and some of those other answers there when talking about the Achilles, but one thing that perked my ears up or got my attention and eyeballs was when Sidney Jones talked about his developing relationship with Rasul Douglas. How much do you think that will have an impact? If you can't play, there is always the film room and film study, and how much do you think those guys could turn into a Batman and Robin?
Yeah, I mean, the hope is it's the new Sheldon Brown and Lito Shepherd. I mean, you bring them in at the same time, and hopefully you have a pair of corners to be really, really good and excelling for a number of years. And for an organization that has struggled at that particular position for a number of years now, I think it's important that these guys do hit and develop a rapport and become two guys you can count on. Because let's face it, the Eagles went all in at that position, and they need these guys to do well.
Talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Sidney Jones in town. He did meet with the media today, and his partner in crime, I guess, the Eagles envision this is kind of their Lito and Sheldon moment, right? Rasul Douglas. These two guys, they hope, are playing next to each other for 10 years. They got their lockers right next to each other. And you look at Rasul Douglas, who Dana Holgerson was on with us last week, and he said, hey, you're going to love this guy's size. He's long. He led the nation in interceptions. But you look at the depth chart, Rasul Douglas probably, has a chance to play a lot, right? I mean, he's a guy that they need to step in. What did they want to see from him this weekend that gives them confidence that he was the right guy in that third round? Because you would think that they took Sidney Jones with the mindset of there's another guy we like that we think can play right away, right?
Yeah, and there's no question. I mean, even more so than Derek Barnett, who's the 14th overall pick, the Eagles need Rasul Douglas on the field first and foremost because they have, eventually things will work out with Brandon Graham. They still have Chris Long. They still have Vinnie Curry. So you can sort of go slowly with Derek Barnett if you need to. The hope is he can play right away, but you do have the luxury of bringing him along more slowly. You don't have that luxury with Rasul Douglas. Right now, the starting cornerbacks on this team are Patrick Robinson and Jalen Mills. That's not good. And they see what everyone else sees, a real lengthy cornerback, 6'2", as you mentioned, Mike, tremendous ball skills, just has an innate ability to find the football when it's in the air, and he plays faster than his stopwatch speed. So that was the big knock on him, the fact that he can't blaze over 40 yards, but, there's football speed and there's track speed, and the Eagles believe Rasul Douglas has football speed.
Johnny Max with us here. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. The NovaCare Center today was hopping. That's where the Eagles rookies were. Let's get to Derek Barnett. Do you expect, just looking at him, I mean, do you expect, is he a guy, when Marcus Smith got here, a lot of people looked at him and said, this guy's just not big enough to play. Like, he didn't look like he was physically strong or big enough. Does Derek Barnett have the look of an NFL defensive end, as opposed to when you saw Marcus Smith as a rookie?
Well, remember, Marcus was brought in to be a 3-4 outside linebacker. I think a lot of people were enamored with his straight-ahead athleticism, and that could translate into a pass rusher. But, yeah, Derek Barnett is probably a little bit undersized for an NFL defensive end right now, but you can see he's got the frame to add weight. And, hey, I've talked to a lot of scouts who think ultimately his best position will be as a base end when he gains some weight, and that would be on the left side. And Doug kind of addressed that on whether the plan is to move Brandon Graham to the right side. And I think it's really just up for debate and see how many guys and who develops and who plays well, because they're going to have a rotation, but they certainly want Derek Barnett to be a part of it.
Yeah, Derek Barnett, and it's interesting because we'll get into the Brandon Graham stuff here in a minute, but you anticipate Graham being here. You got Chris Long, you got Vinnie Curry, you got Marcus Smith, you got Means. So where does Derek Barnett fit in on that tree?
Well, hey, he's a 14th overall pick, so they want him to play. Make no mistake about it, even though they have some depth at that position. Anytime you draft somebody that highly, you want them on the field sooner rather than later. And Jim Schwartz always talks about having a rotation, and in the best case scenario, that would be 4 men, and it would be Graham, it would be Long, it would be Curry, and it would be Derek Barnett. And then you depend on who's playing well. I always say coaches always talk about these rotations on the defensive line, and they do it, and it's not just Jim Schwartz. It's all over this league, and they have the best plans, and they really want to do it. But then when you get to game day and Brandon Graham's playing really well, the last thing you want him to do is take him off the field. So it tends to not work out as it is in theory. And I think, ultimately the plan is the 2 defensive ends to be on this team getting the most amount of repetitions are Brandon and Derek Barnett.
John, do the Eagles view Barnett as their week 1 starter?
No, I don't think they do. And that's what I was saying. They certainly have a luxury of bringing him along slowly, which they don't have with as much with Rasul Douglas. But you do have Chris Long, you do have Vinnie Curry, and you do have Marcus Smith. He's still here, and even guys you don't think about like Stephen Means and Alex McAllister, and they have a lot of bodies at defensive end. So there is a little bit of a luxury to where you don't have to throw him into the deep end of the pool if he's not picking up things as quickly as you would like. However, they would like him to show enough in training camp. They would love him to be a week 1 starter.
How about the running back position? Because Doug kind of admitted that it's fair to say that they don't really have a 3-down back. Does that suggest they're looking for someone like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's another shoe to drop as far as a roster addition from a veteran player, it'll be at the running back position because, hey, it looks barren. Other than Darren Sproles, you're talking about Wendell Smallwood, who's not proven. You're talking about Donnell Pumphrey. And let me tell you guys, when I say he is small, he is small. It is, you wonder, you fear for his life, that kind of small. And, you have Corey Clement, who's an undrafted free agent from Glassboro, and that's a nice story in New Jersey, but I don't think you want to count on him to be an NFL running back as an undrafted free agent. And then Byron Marshall was mentioned today by Doug Pederson as a guy who's cross-training at both running back and wide receiver. The point is they don't have anybody. So that's a position where I think ultimately by the time training camp rolls around, there's going to be a veteran in here.
You mentioned Corey Clement, and he hinted that they are looking, but Corey Clement, the local kid, Doug said that he had a draftable grade on him. So where is Corey Clement, the kid out of Wisconsin? Where is he on their radar?
Well, if they don't bring somebody in, I think he's got a real good chance to make this team. He's a big kid. He's 220 pounds. He offers something they don't really have. More of a Ryan Matthews body type, and Ryan's not going to be here, despite he's still got to pass his physical, and they ultimately are going to release him. But he's big, and he was a draftable commodity to most until he went to the combine and he didn't show much athletically. And you know how this league is. If you don't measure up to at least a sort of a floor from your athleticism, they don't think you're you're worthy of being drafted. And that's kind of what happened to him. But as I mentioned with Rasul Douglas, to a lesser extent, hey, Corey Clement rushed for, I think, almost 1,400 yards at Wisconsin in his last year. So he's proven to be an effective player in a power conference, and who knows, maybe he can show something because the Eagles will certainly be looking. They need help at that position.
You talked about Pumphrey and how small he is. Can you when people talk about him and Sproles, you've been around Sproles. I mean, does Sproles make him look like, squash him with his foot, or do you see the similarities there?
Well, the thing about Darren Sproles is short. He is not small. Darren Sproles is thick and incredibly thick in his lower body. That's not Donnell Pumphrey. Donnell's got a couple inches on Darren Sproles, but his body is from top to bottom. He is just skinny as all get at. And if you saw him, you might think you had a junior high basketball player as an intern in the Eagles locker room. I mean, he's small. And it's going to be interesting because he was a heck of a college player. But I don't know how you hold up. And he mentioned today he plans on adding some weight. He told us today he weighed 176 pounds, and he'd like to get up to about 185. But I don't know how you hold up at that weight in this league. So to me, his ceiling as a player is as a specialist, and he's only going to be able to handle the football probably 10 to 12 times a game max.
Hey, we're talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, and he was up there at the NovaCare Center today for the Eagles rookie camp. How about the other two wideouts, Mac Hollins, Shelton Gibson? Shelton's a guy, he's when we talked to Dana Holgerson, he talked about him and Tavon Austin, the similarities, but he said Tavon was a little bit more polished. I'm interested in the size there from Shelton Gibson. And Mac Hollins is a big guy, right? I mean, there's a kid, you see him come on the field, he's a pretty imposing height-wise.
Yeah, Mac's probably the opposite of Donnell Pumphrey in this class. You look at him and you go, wow, as far as having everything measurables-wise to be a top-tier receiver. But they're kind of the exact opposite. One guy was extremely productive at the college level, and the other basically topped out at 35 catches with North Carolina. Now, the Tar Heels had a ton of talent, offensive talent, so some of it had to do with that, but he's got to prove that he can produce on the field. But certainly physically, he looks like $1 million.
That Hollins, and he's a guy that a lot of people thought he was an underrated. That he got drafted a little late there. I don't know how much action they got or what they even do up there, but you wonder if he looks like a guy that can make some sort of an impact in the receiving game right away. We know that his special teams, resume looks pretty good.
Yeah, he was a real good special teams player. Now the problem is North Carolina did throw the football, and they did throw it well. Look who the number 2 overall pick was in this draft. It was Mitchell Trubisky, a North Carolina starting quarterback. So they threw the football, and they threw it well, and Mac really didn't produce all that much in that offense. So that has to be a concern in the fact that, he wouldn't be the first player who sort of projected better at the professional level than the college level, but you do have to see it. And he didn't produce all that much at North Carolina.
All right, so clear this up with us here, because Brandon Graham, is he not? Is he happy? Is there a contract dispute? What did Doug Pederson have to say about that? Is there an issue with Brandon Graham and his contract?
Yeah, there's an issue. Doug made it clear at the company line it's voluntary. It's not, by definition, it can't be a holdout because he doesn't have to be here. And as I mentioned, it's a similar situation to what went on with Darren Sproles last year. The real question from a holdout standpoint is, does he skip mandatory minicamp? Judging by the way Brandon has always handled his business. I doubt that's going to happen. But it's clear that he's signaling to the Eagles that he wants something done with his contract. And ultimately, I think they will tweak it in a way to make him happy, and everybody will smile and move forward, and everything will be fine. But to say there's nothing going on, Doug kind of intimated, look, there's certain things out of my hands. And that basically was a tip of the cap to say, yeah, Brandon's got an issue, and he's probably not going to be here at least for some portion of OTAs.
That was my follow-up, John, because when does that tweak take place, and do they expect him to be in on May 23rd for organized team activities?
Well, nobody would say, and they said, but I don't expect him in, and we'll see. We'll see if he does show up or if he stays in Detroit. But the one thing Doug said is he's a professional and he's going to keep himself in shape, so they're not all that concerned about it. And that was the party line when Darren Sproles stayed in San Diego last year. And they said, no, there's no issue, even though there was a report that there was an issue. Lo and behold, late July, Darren Sproles got a one-year extension. So it's a very similar situation.
Interesting here, too. We saw Rasheed Bailey the other day. They got a lot of wide receivers. You wonder if Doug, is going to tweak the offense a little bit.
Yeah, well, no, I think he's happy because he prefers, like most teams in this league, he prefers to use 3 wide receivers as his base personnel set. And he did that last year, even though he had the worst group of wide receivers in football. So I think from that standpoint, you'll see that 11 personnel growing, the percentage that they're on the field, because that's what the Eagles want to do, and they have the receivers to do it more this year. So I think, Alshon Jeffrey's certainly going to be in that mix, Jordan Matthews, and then the question is, was the bad year in San Francisco an anomaly for Torrey Smith? If it was, he'll be the third receiver. If not, you'll probably see guys like Gibson and maybe even Hollins pushing him.
All right, John, football's back, at least for the weekend here. They'll practice through the weekend. We'll have John back Monday for more from the Eagles rookie camp. That's just a little taste, a little sliver of some football. The pigskin flying around the NovaCare Center. Reporters sitting in a room waiting for guys for longer than they were told to be out there. But we'll catch up over Monday there, John. Happy weekend to you, pal.
All right, thanks for having me, guys.